Thank you very much for inviting me to talk to this great audience. I mean, I'm always pleased to have economists listen to me. I can go back to my sandbox and talk about data and econometrics and various methodologies that we are using to test causal inference and maybe even bring up some theories. So what I'm told is like this is about Singapore's well-being. So I will try to bring that in the context of household responsibility. And so responsibility of anything should start from individuals. So I'm mostly or exclusively going to focus on water and electricity, mostly water, and talk about how we can achieve that. Okay. So water scarcity is a big challenge. That's true around the world. If you think about it, even in Singapore, obviously there's limited supply. There is lack of natural water resources. We are heavily dependent on rain and other sources and vulnerable to even climate change. And obviously there is increasing demand. Singaporeans on average are consuming around 430 million gallons a day of water, okay? And that is about to double in another 30 years. So clearly the demand is going up and supply is in shortage. So as all economists in the world say, oh, there's a problem, we need to solve this problem. What do we do? Now, if you were an engineer, the way you would try to solve this problem is try to find some supply-side solutions, okay? You would say, let's look at how do we solve this problem from looking at finding more water, so finding more catchment areas for the rainwater so we can store it. You could also look at, how do we import more water, creating new water or desalinating water. Now, all those are very good solutions. Engineers are thinking about it. These are costly solutions. Since I'm not an engineer, I'm an economist and you guys are not, so I'll try to think about other ways to solve this problem. So I mean, just to think about the supply side problems, obviously there are a bunch of catchment areas in Singapore already. They're already catching water. There's importing of the water that can be done from Malaysia and elsewhere. New water can be kind of created. But ultimately, the issue is we can't really use, and these are very expensive ways to solve the problem of water. Whereas if we think about the demand side, so we would ultimately like to have around 130 liters of water per person per day. That would be an ideal goal. That's what the goal of the government is, to try to reduce the water consumption. Right now, it's maybe around 140 liters per person per day. So there is still a gap of, say, 10 to 15 liters of water consumption per person per day. Okay. So demand-side solutions, we will obviously think about how do we do through pricing. We can do through behavioral nudges and other engineering changes, or maybe even education and community engagements. So I'm going to present a series of studies to you guys about how do we achieve these water demand solutions in reducing water demand in Singapore. Okay. So in the first study that we are going to look at is the pricing challenge. So this was, most of you would know that in Singapore, there was a significant increase in water price. One happened in around 2017. The other happened somewhere in 2018. And both of these demands, price were actually significant. There was an increase of around 30% in price if you were consuming around below 40 cubic liters of water, and an increase of around 41% in price if you were consuming more than that. So you can think about these were not like small increases in price, but significant increase in price. So question was, do these kind of solutions work in looking at water demand? And how do humans actually, consumers, change their behavior? So, this was a paper we had written. This is with my co-authors, so I should definitely acknowledge 4 of my other co-authors who are at NUS in various departments. So let me talk about this again. This price increase is one again going from $2.10 to all the way $2.74 if you're consuming less than 40 cubic meters of water, and it went from $2.60 to around $3.60. So there is a long literature. I'm not going to bore you with any literature here. So I'm going to directly talk about what we do. So we first go and try to collect the data. So here we are going to collect individual account level data for essentially all apartments in Singapore. We'll collect this data over a 10-year period, monthly billing data. So we have around 120 million observations of data from 2011 to 2019. So I'm guessing pretty much all of your water consumption data is in here, okay? So here is the first fact from the data. If you look at HDB flats, okay, after the policy announcement, you see a reduction in water demand. Right away, you can see from the graph itself, there is a discontinued drop in water demand. If you actually look at the private condos, there is nothing, no change. It's just a flat line of water usage. So clearly, some people are responding. You could argue the people living in the private condos, they are rich, they are not sensitive to this price change. And people living in HDBs are more sensitive to this price change. And that's exactly what we want to exploit. So I want you to think about this in a very classical medical research where you have a treatment group and you have a control group, what they will call an RCT trial, okay, randomized control trial, and we are going to treat the people who are actually in the HDBs in our treatment group and people who are in the private condos as our control group, and we will have this treatment, which is price change in 2017, and so we are going to shock the people who are in our treatment group essentially by increasing the price of water for them, and then see does the treatment work or not by their water demand, okay? Now, I mean, it's maybe a while since you actually ran regressions and looked at regressions, so I'm going to jog your memory. This is a very simple regression we are running here, very straightforward, where we actually saying, looking at HDBs and their water usage after the announcement of this policy, and you can see there is a drop of 5.8% of water usage by HDB relative to the HDBs before the announcement and relative to the non-HDBs, which is the private condo people. So HDBs actually dropped their water usage by around 5.8%. If I dig that a little further and look at not just the announcement effect, but also the price increase. So there was an announcement, they will increase the price, but then there was an implementation of that price increase a few months later in 2017 and another increase in 2018. So what you see is still there is an announcement result, which is in column 2 of 3.7% reduction in water consumption purely because of the announcement, and a further reduction of water consumption of around 2.1% and 2.8% because of the implementation of the policy. So some people reduced their water purely because they saw this announcement and they said, let me reduce water usage, and others did it after the actually implementation of the policy. So if I look at Google Trends, so people searching for water price after this policy was announced, there's a huge amount of people searching for this. So clearly this was sticky in their mind. Economists will argue, this could be rational inattention, that when you talk about, announcement, so people are very busy in their life and once they hear the announcement, they say, let me change my behavior right now. Whereas when the policy will be implemented, I may be busy, I may not pay attention to it, I have other things to worry about it, so I'm going to change my behavior right now. So those are the people who are not really price sensitive, but they're information sensitive, so they change their behavior after the announcement. Okay. Here is what you can look at, people, how this announcement will work. The people who are sensitive, they will immediately change their behavior. Okay. Here we are looking at the behavior of these people in terms of drop in water demand. If I look at what is happening to the demand for water across different HDB bedroom sizes, just to see who is more sensitive to such behavior, you can see there is a drop across all of them. I mean, people who are living in small units relative to also people who are living in larger units, all of them essentially do respond to this price increase. Okay. What happens in terms of when you actually implement the policy? People who actually have higher demand, they are more likely to respond for the implementation of the policy. So I'm saying there are two things. One is the announcement of the policy, one is the implementation of the policy. When you actually increase the price, people who use more water, those are the ones who will actually reduce more usage of the water. So you can see clearly that people with higher demand actually reduce water after this policy. This is something more technical. We were looking at do people actually move from this above 40 cubic meters to below 40 cubic meters because they realize there is a cutoff for people who are at this kink of 40 meters, cubic meters. There is no really such effect that we can document in the data. Okay. You can also do this in many other ways. You can kind of try to look at in terms of household income and who is more sensitive to water demand relative to their household income. You can look at that water demand and also the household income. So you can think about what we can do. We also wanted to do, does this announcement actually matter and who are actually saving this water? Maybe it is because we made this announcement salient to the consumers. As you can see, everybody was searching water pricing, and that's why they saved. So we started to look at some other data to look at if you were given these GST vouchers, because subsequently for the lower income households, the government also gave out these vouchers to offset, because the price increased, so they were paying a higher price on water. So they said, let's give them some money to offset this extra burden that they will have to pay for water. So that could have undone this whole experiment. Imagine I actually increase the price to you of water, but then I give you a voucher, and then you get the voucher, you say, oh, I got paid for the increase of water I'm going to use, so I'll just keep increasing the water, I'll increase my water demand again. So the effect of price increase would be undone. What we actually find is that's not the case, that the water demand did not go up again by the consumers, even though you were given the voucher. And the main reason is because the salience of the voucher was not actually there to the consumer. Let me point that out here a little bit, that here is a graph that kind of shows you the Google search of this voucher versus the Google search for when the announcement was made in terms of the price increase. And you can see the blue line is at the bottom, whereas the voucher was given in terms for them to offset the increase in this increase in price, and nobody was actually looking for it. So what happened is essentially the price increase was very salient. People actually paid attention. They reduced their water demand. When they got this offset, it was not salient. They didn't pay attention, so they didn't increase their water demand afterwards. So this was our first experiment where we were looking at how actually prices matter when we are thinking about reducing demand for a resource that is constrained in the Singapore context. Okay? So in summary, do consumers respond to price increases? Clearly, they do respond, and they respond both to the information and the price change itself. Okay. Is price increase regressive? Okay, because the point was that, look, is it hurting the poor people more? Because those are the ones who are actually using water, and this price increase will be hurting them more. And we find that not to be true, because they get these vouchers that offsets their actually higher burden to pay for water without finding any increase in their water demand. Would utility subsidies undermine water conservation? Clearly not. So in all three aspects, we find very positive results that price increases work, the policy is not regressive, and it does not undermine the conservation of waters. Okay? You can think there are lots of policy implication. Clearly, we don't do any policy supply of water issues. We are looking at demand, and this is a nice way trying to solve the water demand side problem. Okay. Let me move on and talk about a second study where we are trying to understand, again, in the context of water usage, how can we reduce water? And here I'm trying to see if actually changing the plumbing in your house can help. Or essentially, I want to change the plumbing and also maybe try to nudge you to reduce water consumption. Okay. So I wanted to exploit this housing policy in Singapore, which says that this HIP policy, which is Home Improvement Program. Now, some of you may have actually participated in the Home Improvement Program. What that Home Improvement Program essentially does is it's ask the people living in HDBs and saying, if you would like to participate, and then we'll go out and change the plumbing and other fixtures in the building, okay? And the nice feature of this is that if 80% or more of the households in the building agree to this, that's the only time they will actually go out and change it. So that, for an economist, gives a very nice setting to look at two buildings, where one in which more than 80% agree to do this, changing the fixtures of Home Improvement Program, another building where only 75% agree, so there is no change of fixtures anyway. So you can have this control and treatment group again. Control are these guys who actually voted below 80% and treated who voted above 80%. And then we can just compare these two buildings and see, look, you changed your fixtures. What happens to water usage in that building relative to the other building, both before and after this treatment was given to you, essentially. Okay? So in this map of Singapore, this is where we actually looked at all the buildings that are essentially treated and controlled buildings. So they are very close to each other at many times. So it's not like there are income differences or socioeconomic differences among these buildings. Okay? I don't need to necessarily go over the program details. Everybody here is Singaporeans, so you would really understand it even better than me, what the program is and how it actually works. Okay. We were looking at this program, and we were trying to also see what was the subsidies actually they're actually getting in terms of this program. How much do the consumers actually pay when the Home Improvement Program comes in? It's not a big burden. I mean, on average, people, if you're living in 1 to 2 bedroom apartments, you're paying around $630 from your pocket, whereas the government is paying the remaining part. So the burden on the consumer is relatively small for these home improvement programs. Okay. Again, I'll skip the literature. As an economist, we have to kind of take care of making sure we are citing everything properly. So the data, we'll again use the same data set that I described to you earlier, where we have this monthly billing data for all consumers in Singapore for a period of 10 years. But on top of that, what we then did is we actually looked and collected building by building, which building was actually going through the Home Improvement Program and which building has not gone through that program. So we know exactly a treated building and a controlled building, and then we want to look at what is happening to water usage before and after the program. So here is the basic result, that after the Home Improvement Program, there is a reduction of water usage for every household in that building that is treated by around 3.5% on average. So that's quite a lot, quite a big effect. Now the question is this effect short-lived? I mean, is this just for a month or 6 months after they have the Home Improvement Program, and then they go back to actually increasing their water usage? Okay. We will show you what happened. I mean, I don't have a graph here, but actually the effect is lasting for almost 10 years. From the time you actually get the Home Improvement Program, if I track your data for the next 8 to 9 to 10 years, your water usage is reduced by 3 to 3.5%. So we find significant effects and very persistent long-term effects of water usage. The other thing we were exploiting in this study is, does nudging also work? So clearly, when we actually do plumbing changes, it works very effectively by around 3.5%. That is quite significant. So you must have also seen in your bills, they actually started giving you these comparators. One was the average comparator of everybody who is similar to you in the building. And they said, this is your bill, and this is the bill of people who are similar in your bill. They're above you or below you on average, their water consumption. And they also gave you the national comparator. So they said, this is what the national average is of water consumption. So we wanted to see if these kind of comparators work, and do they nudge you to reduce your water consumption. But be mindful that imagine you're above. So, if you're above, what will happen? You will come down. But if you're below, then what will happen? You might say, oh, I'm consuming too little water. And then you might actually think of moving upwards because you want to grow closer to the average. Now, it gets even more complicated. Imagine that you are below the national, but above the neighborhood average. What will happen? Or vice versa. If those are the situations, you might say, which is my anchor? Is the local my anchor, or is the national my anchor? And how do I change my water usage? Okay. So there's a long literature that talks about, what happens to nudging, and does nudging actually work in these kind of situations. There is also this whole idea of a boomerang effect that is being documented, that you may actually do it, but eventually, the nudging doesn't work, and you actually go back and increase your water. Okay. Sorry. So we wanted to look at what will happen in your water consumption when you actually have this nudge. We do find that the nudge works very well, okay? The nudge actually reduces the nudge does actually reduce your water consumption a little bit if you're above, but it also gives this kind of conflicting, because if you're below, we found that some of the consumers were actually increasing their water average. And it's more complicated because some of them were anchoring to the local and some were anchoring to the national water usage. Okay. So we can see there is a clear water effect because of the efficiency improvement or the plumbing changes in your apartment, but the nudge is not very good at solving the problem. So I do a lot of behavioral economics. I do believe in it, but I'm not a big salesperson of the idea of nudge because it's not very clear it works very well. Okay. So you can think of policy implications of this. There's huge policy implications on how should we try to solve the water problem. Oh, I have 5 minutes. So let me see. I have a third paper. Let me try to introduce this to you guys, even though I may not have enough time to kind of go through everything, okay? So the other thing is about, do green building certifications work? Now, some of you actually may have gone through a process of green building certification of your building, and essentially the idea is that they want to call it green and give it a green mark certificate, and that may actually change your behavior. Now, green mark certifications actually have huge implications for buildings because buildings are a big contributor of carbon dioxide emissions. They're actually around 37% of the world's emission comes from the build industry. And a lot of the building sector is going through this change where they want to reduce their carbon emission. So they're saying, let's kind of change our building into green and change the fixtures and change a lot of both the electrical things and also the mechanical things to reduce our carbon footprint. Some of you may have seen these green mark schemes. Singapore has introduced these green mark schemes since 2005. There are 4,000 plus buildings that have essentially gone through this green mark certification over the years. Maybe around residential, not as much, only 10%, but commercial, a lot more buildings have gone through this green mark certification. Okay? So we collected all the data on green mark certification across the buildings for around 15 years, and we wanted to see what is happening to buildings that are green mark certified before the certification and after the certification, especially on water and electricity usage in these buildings. Okay? The main result is that if you look at it, there's an increase in water usage in the green mark certified buildings. Let me say this again. There's not a decrease in water usage, but an increase in water usage. So that might be surprising. What is happening? The common area water usage does go down by 11%, but it goes up by individual households by 3.3%, which is around 5 times the increase. There is an increase of 5 times of water usage relative to the decrease in the common areas. So immediately you start thinking, why are consumers now increasing their water usage when their building got certified as green? Okay? So we started digging into it, trying to understand what is going on. There could be many factors. There could be, they used to actually use the common area water to water their plants or wash their cars, things like that. Now they don't have that access to the water, so they have to use their own water source. So we started thinking about that. There could be other ideas, could be rebound, People start thinking, there is a rebound effect, that there's improvement in the efficiency, so I just kind of use more water. None of them actually pan out in the data, because when we look at who is actually using more water in terms of green mark certification in the households, it's not just the people who are living in the low apartments, but even very high. So the idea was, if you're washing your car or use your watering your plants, you could actually, now you have to use your own water, because now you can't use the public water or the building water anymore. Okay. So let me talk about electricity. So we also looked at electricity, because we have a lot of the electricity data, very similar electricity data, building by building. We also find electricity usage goes up. So then the story doesn't add up. It can't be you are stealing water. You could be stealing water. You can't really be stealing electricity. So this whole stealing story kind of doesn't work. So then we were thinking, what could be the reason why people do this? So the reason we came up with is because there is a wealth effect. So what happens is, as soon as you get a green mark certification, the house prices on average go up by around 7%. So consumers who are living in these green mark certificate buildings, they kind of feel richer. Because they have this positive wealth effect, they feel like, okay, now I can splurge on things. One of the places I can splurge is I can use slightly more water or electricity. I don't have to think about it, because anyway, I have this huge positive wealth shock. Okay. We looked at many other results, and none of those actually kind of pan out for us, trying to show what other mechanisms could be at play. Okay. Yeah, it says time is up. So I have a lot more results. What I will do is I will adhere to the timing. I'll stop here. Maybe you can ask me questions if you have about this in the Q&A section later. Thank you.